welcome to this summer's Teach Happy Book Club, where I'm going to recommend 5 books that you could potentially read this summer. You don't have to read all 5, but I'm going to suggest 5, and maybe you could choose 1 or 2 that interest you to have a read of. And the first up is this one. It's Drive by Daniel Pink, first published in 2009, and the subheading is The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. And I highly recommend this book because it has huge implications for the classroom and also schools, because this delves into behaviour and motivation. And typically in the past, psychologists have identified 2 main drivers for motivation and behaviour. The first is biological drives. So human beings are motivated to find food, to find water, to find a mate to procreate with. The second drive is extrinsic. So typically rewards and punishments help us move towards something and do something, or avoid something and stop doing something. And then psychologists discovered that there was a third drive, which has been coined as intrinsic motivation. So when we do something not because of a biological drive, not because we stand to gain a reward or avoid a punishment, but purely because we find something intrinsically, internally enjoyable, satisfying, motivating, interesting. And this has huge implications for the classroom, because learning is an intrinsically motivating activity. And what some studies show, though, is if you offer rewards or punishments around learning, you can actually demotivate people. So even if you're offering a reward, if you do this, you'll get X. Studies show that can actually demotivate people on intrinsically rewarding tasks such as learning. So fascinating read. First book is Drive by Daniel Pink. The book I'm recommending is Lifetime by Professor Russell Foster, who is Professor of Circadian Neuroscience at the University of Oxford. And this is a fascinating book. It delves into the science of sleep, or more accurately, the science of circadian rhythms, which is essentially our internal body clock. And I didn't realise until reading this book how important are circadian rhythms for influencing our immune system functioning, our brains, pretty much every single bodily function, our mental health. So much is controlled by or significantly influenced by our circadian rhythms. And our circadian rhythms, our body clock, can go out of kilter. And so it's important to every single day reset our internal body clock, our circadian rhythms, and this book kind of talks about how you can do that. And just to read a short section about how important sleep is. During sleep, we establish most of our memories. We solve problems and process our emotions. We remove dangerous toxins that build up during activity. We rebuild metabolic pathways and restore energy reserves. And if we fail to get sufficient sleep, brain function, emotions, and physical health all fall apart rapidly. Our sleep defines our ability to function while we're awake. And the reason I think this is essential for teachers to read is because I do a lot of work with teachers around their own mental health and well-being. And one of the things that comes up time and time again is when we're stressed, our sleep starts to kind of fall apart. And this book talks a lot about the link between stress and sleep. It gives practical tips. They're evidence-based. It's not a provocative book. It doesn't talk, it's very balanced and measured. And I think it's a fascinating book. So Lifetime is book number 2. Book number 3 is this one. It's High Performance, Lessons from the Best on Becoming Your Best, written by Jake Humphrey and Professor Damian Hughes. And this book is based on their kind of well-known podcast, which is the High Performance Podcast, where both these two interview high performers from the world of business, from the world of sports, from the world of media. And what this book does is it tries to, sift through all of those podcast interviews and find what are the themes, what are the lessons, the kind of, the common themes that have come out from those interviews that we can all learn from so that we can kind of perform at a higher level. And there are 3 main sections. There's a section on mindset. So these high performers, how do they think? What motivates them? How do they manage their emotions? The second section is about behaviors. So what are the habits that typically high performers do? How do they play to their strengths? How do they think flexibly? And the third section is about high performing teams. So what is the culture of a high performing team typically? How are high performing teams led? So looking at the leadership kind of structures and what good leaders do in high performing teams. And I do think that this, again, has big implications for the classroom, how we lead our schools, how we lead our classes. So yeah, that's book number 3. The book is this one, What Mental Illness Really Is and What It Isn't, by Dr Lucy Foulkes, who is a psychologist at UCL and also the Anna Freud Centre for Children and Families. And really this book does exactly what it says on the tin. It delves into the research, the academic literature as well, about what actually is mental illness. What's really interesting, it talks about the benefits but also the problems of mental health awareness campaigns, because one of the benefits of mental health awareness campaigns over the years is it's acted to destigmatize talking about mental health, talking about mental illness. Those are the positives. Some of the downsides are that we now, like normal everyday people, are using the language of mental illness to describe what we might call typical psychological pain or distress. So we might be using terms like anxiety and depression to talk about typical ups and downs of lives, and that's not necessarily helpful. It's not helpful for people that are going through normal ups and downs, but also it's not helpful for people that are, truly in a state of distress because they're struggling with a mental illness, a clinical mental illness. There is so much in this book. It looks at why adolescence is a particular time of risk for developing a mental illness. It takes a really balanced view about social media and spending time online. Is it a problem for our mental health or is it not? It talks about how we can get expert help if we are or other people we know are struggling. But it also ends with really practical tips about how we can help ourselves and help others promote positive mental health and well-being. So really fascinating book. I think it's really important, the more we talk about mental health and well-being, that we know what we're talking about. And I think this book gives us a lot of pointers. It's research based and it gets us to think and reflect a lot. So this is book number 4. And book number 5 is a shameless plug of one of my own books, which I co-wrote with Dr Kell. It's called A Little Guide to Teacher Wellbeing and Self-Care. And there are 6 main sections to this book. The first chapter is about purpose and values. Why do you do what you do? What is important to you from a values perspective, and making sure you're in a context where that is aligned with your values and your sense of purpose. Second section is about perspective. How can you maintain your sense of perspective and see the bigger picture when sometimes we're getting bogged down with minutiae and things that don't really matter. Section 3 is about managing workload effectively. There's some practical tips. But also it's kind of getting us to question, do we have to do all of the work that we're doing all of the time? Number 4 is about managing stress and finding balance and taking care of things like sleep, nutrition and exercise. Chapter 5 is about fostering positive relationships, and that's both inside and outside of school. And chapter 6 is about agency. It's about taking control. It's about understanding what we can control and really zoning in on that, and then widening our perspective to kind of maybe think about the things that aren't in our control and whether we can let go of those things. And learning how we can take control in the classroom, but also start to make small changes to the education system as well. It's been shortlisted for a Teach Primary Award, which is something we just found about recently, which is great. Also, we developed, Emma and I, an online course based on this book called Staff Wellbeing and Self-Care in Schools. There's currently 20% off. Details are below. And our online course has been shortlisted for a Teach Secondary Award. So those are the 5 books for the Teach Happy Book Club. Hope you've enjoyed kind of finding out about those books. I haven't delved in too much about them because I want you to read them and enjoy them.